The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello and welcome to SWK's webinar for Payroll 2.0. Payroll 2.0 has been out almost 2 years now, not quite completely 2 years. And what we're going to do is go through all the features that are in 2.0, some of the ones that I like them just because it allows Sage's payroll to be upgraded separately from your version. The reason why 2.0 kind of came out, in essence, was a lot of people needed to upgrade their Sage for payroll, but they weren't quite ready to upgrade yet. So we're going to dive into what is Payroll 2.0, the features that are now in it, how taxes are now calculated in payroll, how tax tables are delivered in payroll. And then I'm going to briefly turn it over to my colleague Nathan, and he's going to talk about payroll, extending it into the HR features that are now in the system and what those are. And then we'll just do an overview of what Payroll 2.0 looks like, and then we'll open it up for questions and answers. So let's just go ahead and get started and say, so what is Payroll 2.0? It is a new UI. In other words, it is the new 4.x framework, like your modules in General Ledger and Sales Order and everything is currently right now in Sage. So they finally upgraded payroll to look like the rest of the other stock modules or core modules that you see currently right now in Sage. So what are some of these new features that we got in Payroll 2.0? One of the biggest things we now have is batch processing. You now can run multiple payroll cycles all at the same time in payroll. So you could have multiple users in the same batch entering payroll, especially if you have a massive payroll and different people are trying to cover their different departments in the system. You have that capability. When you're in that batch in the system, the only drawbacks or these two kind of key features is whenever you're going to do payroll tax calc, whenever you're doing check printing or check registers, you only though can be in one batch at a time. So each batch, even though you might have, say for instance, 5 batches set up, each of those can only be calced, printed, or updated one at a time in the system. And then the other thing is one of the cool features that you now have in Sales Order. So if you've taken advantage of the new Sage 100 2018, you know how in batch entry, like in Sales Order, you can move an invoice from one batch to another if you're not ready to post everything in that batch. That's the only feature also that did not translate over into payroll. So you can't merge a batch, you can't renumber a batch, you can't transfer one employee's payroll from one batch to another. You would just have to delete it and then actually enter it into the batch that you would have wanted to originally enter that into the system. Enhanced screens. Long and short of it, it's in the 4.x framework like I had talked about before. It's the new grid entry. So what you see in Sales Order with the grids, the ability to drag stuff down, move it around, all that is in the system. And when we get to the part where I'll show you payroll, I'll show you some of those features in the system. But you have the calculator button now. You have a nice pretty calendar button whenever you get to a date field. And so when you're in payroll data entry, the employee, there's the little pretty hyperlink, kind of like when you're in Sales Order entry. And you're on that main screen and you see customer number. When you click on that customer number, you know how it opens that customer and customer maintenance. Payroll does the same. If I click on employee number, it will now automatically open that employee for me in employee maintenance in the system. Earnings and deduction codes. This was a big change that happened in the system. They are now 6 characters long. We used to be stuck with the 00, 01, 02, all the way up to 99. Well, now they can be 6 characters long, and it can mean something to you in the system. Also, the description fields have been moved from 13 characters to 30 characters. One of the big things that are also now in the system is tax rules. We're going to discuss this a little bit later on, but there's a new tax rule feature that's in the system that you have now when it comes to earnings and deduction codes. Before, you remember, you used to have to hit the taxes button, and then you would have to sit there and select which one was the tax subject to. You had to either check the box on to apply it, whatever, and so on and so forth. That's all gone, and it's now been replaced with the new tax rule function, and I'll show you that feature a little bit later on. Department security. It's rolled over into the new version in Sage. A lot of people used to use department security, but there's some caveats for that. It used to be their 3-digit user code. Now it's the logon ID. So if your login, like mine would be into Sage, is either T Whitcomb or Ty Whitcomb, whatever it is. Now instead of putting in TDW, now it's your actual logon that you use to log into Sage with. The only caveat also is that does not upgrade. So when you upgrade your Sage system, you will lose that functionality and you're going to have to recreate that security again in the system. Also, you have to have access to all departments to be able to print a check register or the employer expense summary. So if you have somebody in there that you've only given them department, maybe to department 4, and they try to print a check register, they're not going to be allowed to unless you've given them access to all departments. And then same thing with some of these features below, tax profile maintenance, some of the ACA features, period end processing, time off accrual, federal, state, and tax reporting to be able to do your 941 or your W-2s. They will not have access to that unless you've given them rights to every single department in the company. Time off, that's our old benefit accruals that we used to have in Sage. It's now called time off maintenance in Sage, or time off is what we call it. And now those values, it used to be vacation was 1, sick was 1, and the third one you can make it whatever you wanted it to be. Now all 3 of them, vacation, sick, and the third one that we used to have out there, all of those are now editable. If you've been using that feature though, when you upgrade to the 2.0 version, it will default that vacation sick name just because it's always been that way. But all you have to simply do is go into your payroll options and change that to be whatever description you want. The other difference is the calculation has changed. It now actually calculates that accrual based off the exact decimal precision, and then it calculates from there, and then they round it. Whereas before they used to round the pay rate and then calc, now they actually calculate off the actual pay rate and then they round that final number in the system. So they've just kind of reversed where the rounding happens during the calculation of the time off. So another big feature was employee maintenance. That was probably one of the biggest changes, and when we get there and I show you the hands-on, you're going to see the biggest change. But here's a quick snapshot of what it looks like. There's 5 new tabs. They've rearranged the screen crazy like, I guess that's the best way to say it. It's been completely rearranged. You'll see a lot more HR features have been added into Payroll 2.0 for people who are not ready for a full-blown HR system, but they kind of need some of the basic features. Sage has included that in the system. But the last name is now 40 characters. Your first name is now 25 characters, and they've now actually added in a middle name and a suffix. So if somebody has a junior or the second or the third, you now have a place to actually track that information, as opposed to people used to have to take the suffix and shove it in with the last name. They can now kind of keep that information completely separate in the system. Pay cycles, that's another big thing that's in the system. So you now have a new screen when you go in to do payroll data entry for pay cycle. In that pay cycle, you now have to enter the check date on that screen. The reason why is when you enter the check date on that screen, you will no longer see the check date during check printing. So now, because some people used to, and this always used to happen a lot, and we used to always get people calling us saying, I forgot to check my check date and I didn't make sure it's right, and we posted and now we need to reverse it. Well, that you don't have to worry about that anymore. Now when you're setting up the pay cycle at the beginning of the payroll run, that is where you will now enter the check date for that, and the system will automatically use that date when you go to cut checks. The other thing is you're going to notice you will no longer be able to combine pay cycles in one cycle, in one check run anymore. So if you used to combine your bi-weeklies and your monthlies all into the same run, you won't be able to do that. That's one of the drawbacks. You'll have to use the batch function and run a cycle of bi-monthlies and then a cycle of monthlies if they both happen to run and have to have the pay cut on the same date. So there's a lot of features here that have been renamed or removed. So I already had touched on one. Benefit schedule maintenance is now called time off maintenance. And then some of that reporting changed. So benefit accrual report is now the time off report. Federal e-filing and reporting, and you also used to have and state e-filing reporting. So depending on what version we're on in payroll, you have both each of those options. It's now been combined into one. So now it's just federal and state reporting in the system. Tax table maintenance has been removed, and it's now called company tax group maintenance. We'll talk about that a little bit later on, but that feature's now gone, and it's now company specific driven as opposed to a global function in the system like it used to be in the system. The employee totals verification report has been removed off the system. It's no longer there. The payroll check history report's just been renamed to just check history report. They've kind of made it a little simplified from that standpoint in the system. And the paperless office stub viewer has been removed from the direct deposit menu. Now you'll just see that directly in employee maintenance, the ability to be able to see that information in the system. So let's talk taxes. This is where the biggest piece has happened in Sage is. So what is taxes for us now? Taxes is tax rules, which is how we now decide how different earnings codes, deduction codes, pension plans, cafeteria plans, that's how we decide that how those taxes are calculated. And then now we also have tax groups. So each company, so if you have 5 different companies that you're running payroll for, each of those have their own specific tax group that is specific to that company. And then we also have tax profiles. Tax profiles are assigned to employees, and that's how it knows whether what their home state is or their work state is, so it knows how to calculate the taxes for the employee. So let's start with tax profiles. Tax profiles are this. It's now in the payroll setup menu. And pretty much by state, you simply go through and then decide on this which taxes you want to calculate in the system. These are global, or what we call system-wide. So when you set them up once, it's for every single company will have access to these all at the same time, but you have to set this up first to be able to see them. And then what it is based off of the tax ones that we check. So for this is, I have Virginia. And whichever one's checked is the one that I'm telling the system to calculate for. So if for some reason underneath Virginia, if I have unchecked that the Virginia regular withholding in this one, it means it will not calculate tax. If an employee is eligible for that, it's not going to calculate that tax for them. So when you set up these profiles, this is how you set it up. Also, as you know, before in the system, local taxes or local tax reporting, you used to have a modification on your system to handle that. That is now part of the Sage 100 system. So here also in the tax profile maintenance is where you would set up if you need to account for local taxes in the system. You'll just do a lookup on the tax location code, find the county that you're trying to calculate tax for in Virginia, and assign the profile for it accordingly in the system. Company tax group. This is the other piece that I was talking about. So back in the olden days, we used to have tax table maintenance. That is gone. So now instead of tax table maintenance in this company that I happen to have, I would select Virginia, and then this is where I would enter my GL accounts that for that company only, the GL accounts that are eligible for that company. But then on the second tab over there where it says tax rates, this is where I will get my tax rates. So for Virginia, and for us, we have an unemployment tax that's assigned to everybody at the beginning of every year. The cool part about this new feature for Sage is you now have the ability to put multiple tax rates, keep track of them all, and based off the effective date, when we run our payroll and the check date will look to this effective date to figure out for this person's payroll check, which rate is it using. So like in Virginia, you normally would get your unemployment rate about October, November. And what we used to have to do in the olden days, you would used to have to take that piece of paper, stick it on somebody's desk or in a folder, and then you would have to wait to make sure you remembered on January 1 to put that new rate in. Well, that is no more. You now, the minute you get that piece of paper, you can jump in here in the system, put the rate in, say this is the effective date of that rate, and then file it away and then don't remember, and then come January 1, you know you're going to be good because you already put in that effective date already, so the system knows when to calculate that tax for. Tax rules. This is probably one of the biggest changes that has happened for everybody. And there's a guide out there on Sage Online, so if you're not already on Payroll 2.0, whatever consultant will help you upgrade your system. And I'll segue and just really quickly digress and discuss this piece real quick. Payroll 2.0, if you're currently using Sage's Payroll, you need to adopt Payroll 2.0 by the end of this year. So if you're still on version 2014 of Sage, 2015 of Sage, you need to be able to upgrade, obviously, by the end of this year to a current version. 2018 is the existing release of Sage now. 2019 actually was just released today, but it has the new Payroll 2.0. You're going to need to upgrade to this version, and you're going to have to test your payroll in a test system. Why is that? Tax rules are now how Sage uses it to calculate tax. So when I come in here, say for instance to this one, which happens to be regular hourly, when I do a lookup on that tax rule, I select the tax rule. I do not get to control, like we used to, the checkbox of do I calculate tax, don't calculate state tax, do I calculate FICA, do I not calculate FICA. You have to select one of these predefined rules and apply it to your earnings code or your deduction code if it's a cafeteria plan or a pension plan, and the system will automatically calculate the tax based off of the law. So whatever the law is from the IRS, this is what drives these tax rules in the system, so it knows how to calculate tax. So the reason why we're telling people that they have to do a test is you want to be able to compare a payroll that you ran in your old system against a new payroll using these tax rules to make sure that the numbers are the same. I have people that have went to the new tax rules, and you're normally over under at least by pennies to $1. It's normally never more drastic than that, but there will be some minutia in terms of calculation that you just need to make sure that you've assigned the correct tax rule to all your earnings codes and your applicable deduction codes, so that when you go live, you don't have employees screaming because you accidentally assigned the wrong tax rule to your codes. All right. And these tax rules are not company specific. They are global for every company that you access this for. So these are the global tax rules defined in the system that Sage rolls out with Payroll. You just assign accordingly. So the new thing is tax tables. What is tax tables? Tax tables are now cloud-based. So before, you used to have to call us at the beginning of the year or during the year and say, hey, can you connect with us and download a new tax table update? Or if you were savvy enough, you would download your own tax table yourself. That is no more. With the new Payroll 2.0, whenever you go into payroll data entry or you access something in Payroll and Sage for the first time, it looks at the last time that you did a tax table update, and if there's a new one, it will pop up the screen saying, do you want to update to the latest payroll tax update? You can say no and continue on if you have other stuff to do. Or underneath the payroll utilities menu, there are two new features there. There is the payroll tax update, as you can see at the bottom left, where you can manually put the payroll tax table update on your system. And then there's a report. And when you run that payroll tax update report, there's two features there. You can say what's installed, and it will give you a quick listing of what's included in that update and what changed when it installed that tax update. Or there's a drop down that says pending update. So if there's a tax table update out there that's pending that you haven't installed yet, but you want to see, okay, in that new update, what is it going to change? You can run that report and see what that is ahead of time. So the flexibility is now you don't have to worry about that. And with that payroll tax calculation, it does the same thing like it did over there for the unemployment that I showed you. When you cut a check in Sage, it looks at that check date, it looks at the tax table update, and it will make sure that it applies whatever tax was effective based off of the check date. So that's one of the cool features to make sure that you're always calculating the correct tax based off of the date that the check was cut or the direct deposit was ran, either one. So with that new feature, there was a new added feature in the system called service notification. And what that service notification does is it allows you to set up a group of people that if for some reason, if the tax calculation engine is down, if they're going to have unplanned outages, or if for some reason it's not able to run and calculate, it will send a notification to somebody on the team that it's down. So far, knock on wood, I haven't seen, I'm signed up for the service. I haven't gotten an email sent to me. Granted, I get a lot of emails. I might have missed one, but the system has been pretty stable and you're good to go in terms of there's really been no outages. I mean, there's been outages, but they're planned outages. Like you knew in advance that it was going to be down for maintenance at this time. But there really has been no unplanned outages so far to date that I know of since we've released the new payroll update service that is in the new 2.0 in terms of tax tables. So I'm going to turn this over to Nathan. Nathan?
Perfect. Thanks, Ty. So, folks, my name is Nathan Triplett. I'm our Director of HCM here at SWK. Looking through the list of folks on the conversation or on the call today, looks like a lot of organizations I've met with and had conversations with. So, next slide, please, Ty. Really, the big thing that I'm doing here at SWK right now is just have conversations with our payroll customers and make sure we understand what our options are and what strategies are available. And what I wanted to share a little bit today is just around Sage 100, the strategy around Sage 100 payroll. And, you know, there is one, which for those of us who have been working with this product for a long time know not much has changed in the past, 10 or even 20 plus years with the product. So some good things are happening. So this is not Sage's perspective. This is more of my take in terms of where strategically Sage, I see them going with the product. So first and foremost is they're bringing the product up to framework, which is a very good thing. It's one of the last modules to be brought to the business objects framework. So it's a good thing from a functionality and from a usability perspective. And for those of you who use and rely on the payroll module, a good sign of further investments to come from Sage's perspective. Another thing that I've seen them do strategically is to enhance the security and functionality within the system, whether it's encrypting the data, whether it's providing more flexibility around the permissions that are being granted. They're recognizing that the space around payroll is changing and there need to be some adjustments within the payroll product accordingly. And with that, they're extending the HR functionality within the product, which I think is a really good thing because a lot of folks out there and a lot of folks on this call, Sage 100 Payroll also serves as your HR system or your system of record for employee information. So by enhancing some of the screens within employee maintenance and adding some additional functionality in, similar to what they did last year with ACA to allow 1095s to be produced through Atrix, really allowing this to be more of a source for that demographic information, especially for smaller companies and keep us out of spreadsheets or ancillary systems. Beyond that, I think the smart thing that Sage has done is they've recognized that a lot of organizations maybe have outgrown Sage 100 Payroll, but are really used to it. And so those organizations that are over 50 employees that have more responsibilities around compliance and EEO reporting and the ACA reporting, they're giving more functionality within the system, but also within the Sage suite of products, extending and enhancing some of the integrations they have with other platforms. So next slide, please, Sam. So one of the things I wanted to show is, there's an integration or an interface with the Sage HRMS HR. Now, this is a separate database. Many of our customers are using this where we find the employee maintenance just doesn't go quite far enough. And so what you're seeing now is the integration screen within Sage HRMS. It's a separate database, a separate license that a lot of folks use to help manage, benefits, safety, again, compliance, and a lot of additional details that maybe Sage 100 doesn't track. So what they've done is they've updated this interface to reflect the new approach that Ty just mentioned around taxation and setting up tax codes within the system so everything flows through accordingly. And if you look at the next slide, I have another screenshot, Ty, just to kind of show you how we're transferring that information over. And so philosophically, Back 20 years ago, 30 years ago, when this module was developed, payroll was the driver for HR, where sort of, everything landed through payroll. Employees were set up initially in payroll. And where we've seen this space go now from an HR perspective with benefits and onboarding and training and learning and performance management and all of those things, HR is much more of the strategic function, where payroll is more transactional. And so when we go to onboard an employee, a lot of organizations now are starting to onboard them in HR and then are pushing the information over to payroll. And so what Sage has done with the link is allowed for those organizations that need additional HR functionality within the HR system, track all employee information, all their demographics, job and pay history, compliance information, all of that, and then synchronize it with payroll. So there's still that single source of data entry and that single record of truth, and not the need to have any redundant entry through the system. And I have next slide, Ty. The other piece that Sage has added that quite frankly has been missing for a while is the ability for employees to have a little bit more interaction with their data. So in the past, if we wanted to push out pay advices through Sage 100, we could use the paperless office function to email those out. It's not really a portal. We need to determine passwords, and forgetting passwords can be a little bit tricky. So what Sage has done is the Sage HRMS employee self-service module within their HRMS product now interfaces or integrates with Sage 100 payroll data. And so if you look in the right-hand side of your screen there, you see the pay history. So once we print and post checks, we have the ability now within Sage 100 payroll, if you are a Sage HRMS user, to push out pay stubs to employee self-service, which is a portal that's going to allow employees to log in, see all their historical data, demographic information, basically as much as you want to expose to them, you can. And the biggest piece that folks use that particular portal though for is pay stubs. And so if employees have questions about previous pay advices, if you want to get out of the paper printing and distribution business, if employees are consistently coming to you and needing 3 months of checks for a refinance, all information now we can put at their fingertips without having to go through email. So just wanted to make sure we had some awareness around that. I've included my contact information here, which you will see on the next slide. Again, as Ty mentioned, Sage is really supporting 2018 and beyond in terms of Sage 100 for payroll users as of the end of this year. I've had a lot of conversations again with folks in the call just to talk about what that means, upgrade strategies. Should we move to 2018 or 2019? What do the additional components look like? What are the service-based offerings that we have if that's appropriate? So always feel free to reach out to me. I've seen a couple questions come in, just some housekeeping. Encourage you to keep those questions coming as Ty is going through her presentation. We'll make sure they're addressed at the end of the presentation. And for the folks that have asked, we will be sending out this presentation and the slide deck after. So we will make sure we get that to you along with our recording. So thanks for the time. And now I'm sure what you've all been waiting for, a nice quick overview of the Sage 100 Payroll 2.0 functionality with Ty.
All right, so let's see it. Give me 1 second. Let me shut this down really quick, and we are going to see what it looks like here. So here is my payroll system. So let's start off with the good parts. Employee maintenance, that's where you're going to see the biggest change that was in the Sage 100 system. Here's one of the things I told you about. If there is a new payroll tax update, this is what will happen. It's going to pop up saying, hey, there's a payroll tax update that is ready to install. Do you want to install it? I can say yes, and that's how quickly the new tax table update will get installed into my Sage 100 system, and it'll allow me to continue into whatever function that I was trying to do in the system at the time. So let's just go ahead and bring up an employee here in the system for me. So here's my employee, here's my information. I have the ability to do my email. You're going to notice you have the ability now to track 2 different sets of phone numbers. And then you can say whether they're home, cell, work, and then define whether it's your primary in the system. You have your job titles now in the system, whether they're full-time, part-time. You still have your employee statuses, but you're going to notice you have a lot more statuses now here in the system. You have a hire, you have a review, you have an inactive, a terminate, and a rehire that's now in the system. Depending on your security for payroll in the system, this social security number, because it's now part of the new PII that Sage is now doing in the system, you might or might not see this social security number depending on your security rights in Sage. So if you're a regular employee that all you do is data entry, you might not have the rights to see the full social security number. You might see the last four, the rest will be blocked out due to PII compliance that has now been integrated into the new payroll system. Over here on the additional tab, you're going to notice now you have 2 emergency contacts. We do some tracking of veteran and some military service information. You actually now have actual ethnicities into the system that have been actually adapted into the system there for you. Your new benefits tab, you're going to see they've adopted those new words, time off in the system. You're going to start seeing that everywhere. This is your new benefits. There's my vacation, sick, personal, all the information. You'll notice that everything's now that new grid entry look like it is everywhere else in the system, all that. You see the new hyperlinks. Let's go ahead and just jump off in that. Here is my time off maintenance. There's my vacation, sick, personal. This information is still the same. The only difference instead of benefit accrual maintenance is now saying time off maintenance, and that's the new lingo that is for that section of the system. Whether the person has medical coverage and what's the effective date, you will now have that information in the system, and that effective date matters because that's when it will make sure that it starts calculating for those employees in the system. Here in the system is my tax locations. We had talked about that earlier. You can see that this person has a local tax set up. So it's actually calculating tax for them, the state, but the local tax is actually making sure it's calculating the local tax for them for Grand Rapids in Michigan. So there's actually a county tax that's involved, or we call a local tax in the system. When I do a lookup, you can kind of see I have all the different places that I've set up local tax for. The system will make sure that it calculates that for me. Based off of my selection down here in the system, it will adapt and change my tax groups and everything up here. Before, you used to have to change the tab to see this information. I'm actually going to go up and make my screen bigger. This is where you set that up, whether it's married, how many dependents you're going to claim, whether you want to do an override. So if I want to override and add an extra $200 of tax every time I do my federal, because maybe I'm trying to do some catch up in the system, this is now where you would set up all that information there in the system. My pay default, you now have 9 pay rates in the system. So before you used to have pay rate 1, pay rate 2. Now you have all of these in the system, and this date change that you see here just keeps track of when that pay rate in the system changed for me in the system. You still have some of your other, also what you have here is this new feature, this alternate employee check name. So perfect example, right? I go by Ty Duncan Whitcomb, right? Most people know me by Ty. Nobody knows me by my legal name, which is Ty Sean. So for me, in this case, they might set up my first name, last name as Ty, but my check will need to come to me in Ty Sean so that the bank will cash my check, though the banks know me for years and years, and if I show up with a check with Ty, they've never told me no, just because it's a local bank. You know how that local bank stuff goes. But that has that capability if for some reason you need to put an alternate name for an employee on a check, say a nickname versus a legal name. So you have that capability in the system that is now there for you to be able to track that in the system. Over here on my earnings tab, it's just giving me a quick history of all that information in the system. I can go, the new cool thing, I forgot about this, I should have talked about it earlier. You now have history in payroll. So you can see I'm going back to 2016, 2017. Remember how you used to have to close every quarter, and that before you could run your payroll for the next year, you had to make sure you closed your year or copied the company so that you had a company to go back and do W-2s with? That is gone. You can now, it's like the other models in Sage. It has its own history. It holds its history. You don't have to make the copies. So on 12/31, I can, on January 1, I can go ahead and cut my check for my employees for the new year. It will calculate the tax based off the tax table for Q1 or whatever the release is. And January 15th, when it's time for me to do my W-2s, I will still do it out of this same company because the system now has the ability to hold historical information. So that's one of the really cool features that also get with Payroll 2.0. I didn't make a big deal of it just because it's kind of, for me, it's in framework. You should have history. That's true. It's in framework. It now has history. You don't have to have now in the system, I have some companies, they have A95, A96, A97. They've had payroll companies historically since the beginning of time. That is no more. Now you have one company. All your years of history will sit here in this company forever and ever and ever in the system for you. Deductions, it's just simply showing the deductions that every employee has in the system, and you can see what the numbers are in the breakdown. And then over here on the pay history tab, you can then see a quick breakdown of all the paychecks you've ever cut. Same thing, you still have this drop down over here for prior years. So that's the cool part. All the years will always show up in here. You can always go back and see that information in the system. It has not gone away for you in the system. Let me drag this down here so I can get to my button that I need. Over here in the More button, you still have your ACA button over here. You still have your renumber button. And then you also have your tax summary button. So what the tax summary button is, just the old tax button that you used to click. You can just come over here and look and see your federal numbers in the system. And if you change it over here to Michigan, it will then show me my state numbers. And then because this is also local, it will then show me what the local numbers for me that are calculated so far in the system. This right here where it says exclude future quarters, what that simply means in the system is if I'm in here for period 3 and I'm going back, if I check to exclude it, it will make sure if there's checks that have been cut for future, I might only want to see year to date up until quarter 3 as opposed to all the way out to quarter 4 if I already had started cutting checks from there. So this is a way for you to quickly see what people's checks were up to the quarter that you've selected over here. But you have the same ability. If I change this to 2016 and change this to quarter 4 in the system, I can go through and see all my history in the system and see what I've calculated at all times in the system. Clicking my detail button, it will give me the ability to see my wages. Have some cool features in here, time worked. It will keep track of all that information in the system, and then I can get my benefits and some other things on this tax summary screen. All right. So the next big thing that's in the system was the payroll data entry. So let's go ahead and show you what that looks like. Here's your pay cycle. You have to pick one in the system. Your period ending date, if I select a period ending date in the system, so I'm just going to select 04/02/2018. Let's do this again. Let's delete this one. 04/02/2018. Let's go further back. 03/01/2018. You notice it will auto update my period ending date to match whatever that bi-weekly function is in the system. So Sage, if you enter in the period ending date, and actually let's just clear my payroll so I can start from scratch. Actually, I was in here playing around earlier. So I'm going to go in here and say I want to do a bi-weekly payroll, and today's date is 04/02/2019. You notice it automatically calculated the period ending date. If I had put the period ending date, it would automatically back calculated for me the period start date. This check date for me right here, this is what I was talking about. When I put this check date in the system will automatically, for me in the system, use that during check printing. I don't have to remember to do it again. It will automatically make sure that every check has that number in the system. I don't have to worry about that anymore. So I'm going to say no, and the reason why I'm going to go in here, there's some features that I didn't really talk about, but I kind of want to show you some of those features in the system. So when I'm in my payroll entry in the system and I hit the enter in the system, there are some features here that we don't ever think about in the system that we have the capability. So if I come in here for me and the employee, right here is this new button here called reverse check. What that would allow me to do is I can go through and select a check in the system and say okay, and it will automatically populate everything for me to reverse that check out as if it never happened. In the olden days, you remember you used to go in, hit the negative, then you would have to go into the system, hit the manual button, and then manually calculate what those taxes would have been and back it all out. That is no more. Now, once you start processing it in 2.0, and it's only checks that have processed in the new 2.0, so your historical information, when it cuts over, you won't be able to reverse those checks, But everything that you enter in Payroll 2.0 forward, you now have the ability to hit that reversal button, do a lookup, and find that check in the system to do that reversal for. But all you would do for a standard check is what you've done before. Select the first entry number. If it's automatic deductions, you just do that, print the check. But this is the new thing. You see the new grid entry? The grid entry is here also in the system. So if there's information you don't want here, you just drag it off, kind of like you used to before, drag it on like you used to. Just simply drag everything around. It's the same grid entry that we have everywhere in the system. You now have that capability. So in this case, I'm going to go in here and say this person did 88 hours in the system. Down here, I'm going to hit the deductions button so that it automatically populates my deductions in the system. One of the cool features is you know, when you used to put your deductions in, then you're like, oh man, I really needed to do a check for them for 90 hours in the system, right? What will end up happening is the system will know to auto recalc those deductions, and it will automatically change those numbers for you. You do not have to do it. All you have to simply do is this little button right here. If I click that button to recalc, it will go through and recalc these numbers based off of the new hours that I've done. I don't have to delete all the lines and do it all over again. I can just simply come in here, and let's just do a gross amount so you can kind of see how bad it changed it. I'm going to make this person's check, let's give them some money. We'll give them $4,500 in here. And now if I hit that button, you can see all the numbers changed. So I don't have to delete all the deductions and add them back in again for it to know to auto recalc the deductions for me. So that was one of the cool features that was put into the system to allow you, if you change the earnings, it can refix your deductions for you automatically in the system. And then you simply do that in the system, you hit yes, and you go to the next employee, and you go to the next employee, and you go to the next employee. But what the new payroll tax calc does is this. When I hit that print button and I say proceed to do my tax calc, it is going out now to the internet, one, to check to make sure that I have the latest tax table update, but it is also making sure that when it calculates the tax, it's using the check date to calculate that tax. One of the things you're going to notice, all your reports in payroll are now in crystal too. So if you want to change this payroll tax data entry audit report to add information to it, take information from it, do whatever makes you happy, you now have the ability to edit this report. So in this case, here is my payroll data entry audit report. This is the new payroll data entry audit report. It's a landscape report that Sage is now giving you for your payroll data entry audit. Here's my employee. There's all the numbers and stuff that it's calculated out here in the system. And then you simply continue to do like you've always done in the system. You would then do your earnings register, your time off register, all your different things will then go ahead and go down the pike. And then when you come in here for check printing, like I was saying before, you're going to notice when you come in here for check printing in the system, there is no check date. All you have is a starting check number. So all you need to do is put that in. The check date here is hard coded to tell you this is the check date it's going to use. So if you need to change that check date, you would have to go back to the pay cycle at the beginning of payroll data entry and make that change. All right. What else? I'm trying to think of the one other thing that I wanted to discuss in here. Your different reports, your pension plan report has been moved over here into the reports. So if you kind of want to see your pension plan history, it is now there in the system for you to be able to look at that in the system. The only other change I wanted to bring up and show you in the system was payroll options, just because this is where I was talking about earlier, where you would now make that change in the system. So over here in the system, if you need to do local tax, this is where you would check the box to turn on the ability to be able to do local tax if you need to do local tax. But over here on the time off, you remember how you used to have just the time off 3? Now you'll notice that all 3 of these descriptions in the system are editable. And then last but not least, the history button. This is where you now retain how many years to hold history. Obviously, if you don't remember, if you're doing ACA in Sage, if you want, because Sage has the ability to do your ACA reporting for you in the system. If you're doing ACA, You have to make sure you're holding 4 years of history to be able to do ACA, but you can hold as many years as you want. So if you want to say, for instance, hold 99 years of history, go ahead and do it as much as you have disk space for in the system. And then obviously the tracking hasn't changed. Deletions, additions, changes, so that when you go into the system and you run your employee audit report, that information is there in the system for you to be able to review and look at. And then to visually see what I was talking about here on the system, that payroll tax update report, you have two choices. There's installed update. I did my update, but if I hadn't done that update, it said before I did it, it said pending update, and I can see what was pending out there. I just had to change that drop down. But if I just want to go back and review what that update did, I can just hit preview. You kind of saw a snapshot of that report before, but now I just kind of want to know, okay, what did that update for me change in the system? This is now kind of where you would see what changed. So this is telling me that in the state of Kentucky, it made some changes to different things. Some withholding looks like it changed. It looks like they added so there's a new section 401k. So this actually changed one of the tax rules that are global in the system. They added a new tax rule in the system to handle 401k loans in the system. And they also added a new tax group. So it looks like there's a new, like some Williamson Arc Encounter thing, tax that's in there got added into the system. And then whatever was associated with that was added into the system for that in Sage. So that's kind of the new Payroll 2.0 from a very high level. If you want to see more detail, if you want to even schedule your upgrade, remember that we had said the deadline for that upgrade has to happen by the end of the year. Make sure you reach out to your account manager and they will get you in touch with whoever so you can get the upgrade scheduled to make sure you take advantage of it before the end of the year. All right. So I guess we're going to open this up for questions in the system. And I'm trying to see, I'm going to read. Somebody said, what about the direct deposit pre-note? That has not changed in the system. So you still have the direct deposit number. You'll still do your pre-note. So in employee maintenance, in Sage, and I'm going to go in there really quick just to show you, it's in the same place. As long as you've turned on direct deposit, obviously in the system. And I don't even think I have direct deposit, but over here in the drop down here at the top of the system, I would have hit my direct deposit, but that has never changed in the system. It still has that capability. All right. Any other questions? Let's see. Somebody asked another question. Give me 1 second. I'm going to pop this out so I can see this a little bit better because my eyeballs are not as good as they used to be. When we go live, can we work on our other system? Yes, you can. So what's what we call a test system, and we have a test system and you have your live system. It will be there. And you'll run both in parallel and tandem. So you can keep running with your production company while you test in your old system. So that one does not go away in the system. How far back does the payroll check reversal go? The payroll check reversal goes far back as when you start processing payroll in the new Payroll 2.0. What that means is when you do the lookup, it will automatically select a check that is there. I get what you're saying. You're trying to, taxes were filed last year. It doesn't matter to us. It will just show up in the lookup as a check that you have the possibility to reverse in the system. Is there a way to see the details of a tax rule? No, there isn't. That's been one of the pet peeves of a lot of people for Sage. If you go out on Sage Online, there's a list of suggested tax rules for what you're trying to process for, but as of right now, Sage has not released what is made up in that tax rule. All they will say is if you're doing regular earnings, you might want to use the regular withholding. If you're doing double overtime, you want to use the double overtime tax rule. There is no release detail, as far as I know, as when I looked at this up like a month and a half ago, there is no detail of what is in the tax rule. You kind of have to use Sage's list of suggestions or apply a tax rule to your earning code or your applicable deduction code, run a test payroll, and see if the taxes calculate the way you wanted it to calculate. And I think that's it. Do we have any other questions? All right, somebody just said I have 4 tax frequencies in each payroll. I'll have 40 different batches. And that question I want more detail on, because it's not based off the tax frequency, it's based off the pay cycle is the only thing you cannot combine in one batch. And when I say pay cycle, I mean whether somebody is hourly, bi-weekly, weekly, those have to be split into different batches. That's the only thing that has to be put in different batches. So if you have 10 employees that are all monthly, they can all go into that same batch. You do not have to separate them out. It's only the pay cycle that forces them to be driven into a different batch. Every batch is its own register. So if all the monthlies, they will be one payroll, one register. All your bi-weeklies will be one batch, one register. Every batch is its own separate register. So if you have, in this case, a set of bi-weeklies, weeklies, monthlies, and semi-monthlies, you will have 4 different registers, 4 different sets of payrolls, 4 different direct deposit files, if that's the case in the system. Are you able to add more than 3 time off items? In Sage, no, you have 3 time offs. So every employee is assigned to their own time off schedule. And based off that time off schedule, there's 3 different breakdowns inside of that one tax schedule. So you might have a 5-year time off schedule that when employees get to 5 years with the company, then they get their breakdown of however you decide to define those 3 different time off buckets. Alex, let's talk about that one offline. I don't know who your account manager is, but reach out to them regarding this question that you have. There might be some workarounds on that one, but please reach out to them on that issue that you're discussing. There could be a way around that we might be able to get that back for you in one batch. There's no guarantees, but talk to your account manager about that. Yes, Ray is awesome. I work with him. I'm actually in the Southeast region and he's up in the Northeast region, and I've worked with him a lot. So yeah, definitely work with Ray on that. And if anything, if Ray has questions, just tell him to ping me and we can discuss it about it a little bit more and see if we can figure out maybe a workaround for you. No guarantees, but we'll try. Do we have any other questions? All right, well, if we don't have any other questions, if you have any questions, reach out to your account manager. The other thing you can do in the system is reach out to helpdesk@swktech.com if you have any questions that are support related that you've been waiting to get answers on. Definitely reach out to helpdesk@swktech.com. We have an awesome support desk that is ready to help you with any questions you have. Or like I said, reach out to your account manager that you work with in your region in the system, or if you have a consultant that you already know you work with, definitely reach out to them and they'll be more than happy to help you with anything that's payroll related. All right.